My own mom said, "I wish you were never born." I stood tall and said, "Consider me as if I never existed. Live your lives as though there was never a daughter." They went silent. The whole party froze. The words echoed in my ears long after I had spoken them. The restaurant felt too quiet, the murmurs and clinking glasses now distant and muffled. I stood there, not sure what to feel. Only that something inside me had shattered. But for the first time, it wasn't the silence that suffocated me. It was the weight lifting off my chest. The evening had started with hope. A glimmer, really. I'd worked so hard to get to this point, hoping that tonight might finally be different. Graduation from Stanford, an MBA in hand, a consulting offer waiting for me back in Seattle. I was ready for my family to see me, to recognize the woman I had become. I thought this dinner could be a chance for that. A chance to finally prove that I was more than just Ashley's overshadowed older sister. My parents had walked into the restaurant like they were royalty, heads held high, expressions unreadable. I had smiled, greeting them with the kind of warmth I'd spent years perfecting. Even when my mother barely looked up as I set down my Stanford certificate in front of her, I kept smiling. Even when my father's eyes flickered toward Ashley's achievements, I let it slide, telling myself it was okay, this night would be mine. I had earned it. But the words that followed shattered everything. "We're proud of both our daughters," my mother had said, her voice cool. "But Ashley, she's saving lives in the ER. That's real impact." Those two words, real impact, were like a slap. And as much as I tried to push past them, they stuck. I had worked tirelessly to make something of myself, yet none of it ever felt like enough, not for them, not for my mother. No matter how hard I tried, how many late nights I spent, it was always about Ashley. And then came the final blow. The one I had feared would come all along. My father had chuckled. "She's clever, sure. But what Ashley does, that's meaningful work." The table had gone silent. The air thick with awkwardness. I had felt every pair of eyes on me, waiting to see what the sensible, quiet one would do. I smiled. My cheeks ached, but I forced it. I held my breath, letting it simmer. And when my manager stood to give a toast, I let myself believe, just for a second, that maybe this would be the moment. Maybe tonight, they would finally see me. The words of praise came from my manager, but they felt like they were meant for someone else. Skylar is one of the most capable young consultants I've worked with. She's destined for great things. I glanced at my parents, waiting for even a flicker of pride. Instead, my father leaned back, his voice carrying the same indifference as always. "Compared to a doctor," he said, "it doesn't measure up." I had felt my insides twist. That was it. The moment it all snapped. Something inside me crumbled. For a brief second, I didn't know what to do with the raw, gaping hole that had just opened in my chest. It wasn't just what they had said. It was the realization that they would never see me for who I truly was. That they would never see me at all. The next words came so softly, they almost didn't feel real. My mother had said it as if it were nothing. "I wish you were never born." I froze. The words sank into me slowly, like ice water. And then, the silence, the kind that suffocates you. The kind that fills every inch of your lungs until you can't breathe. The whole room seemed to stop. No one moved. No one spoke. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I should stay or walk away. I pushed my chair back, the sound of it scraping against the floor, cutting through the quiet like a knife. "Excuse me," I managed, though my voice felt foreign. I didn't look at anyone, not my parents, not even my manager, who half rose from his seat, as if to follow. I walked out of the room, my heels clicking loudly in the hallway. Outside, the night air hit me like a cool breath of reality. The rain had started to fall softly, the sound of it mingling with the distant hum of traffic. I stood there, not knowing what I felt, only that I had never been more alone. But even in that cold, empty space, something shifted in me. I wasn't crying, not yet. Instead, there was only silence. A stillness so profound that I almost didn't recognize it. For the first time, I wasn't drowning in expectations. I wasn't shrinking in the shadow of my family's neglect. I was standing in the middle of it all, on the edge of something I couldn't quite name, something that had been hidden beneath all those years of striving and silence. And then, I felt it, something I hadn't felt in a long time, the first taste of freedom. I stood there in the cold, my heart pounding against my chest. The rain was light, barely more than a mist, but it felt like it was washing everything away. I didn't cry. I didn't even know if I could. But as I stood there, staring out into the Seattle night, something inside me felt like it was finally breaking free. I hadn't expected to leave the dinner, not like that. Not in such a rush. Not with my mother's words still hanging in the air, sharp and heavy. I had always hoped for a moment when I'd be seen, recognized for everything I had accomplished. But instead, I had been dismissed. Just like every other time. My whole life, I had worked and worked, done everything I was supposed to, everything they expected of me, and still, it wasn't enough. In that moment, I realized something. I had been trying so hard to fit into their mold, trying to be what they wanted, that I had lost sight of who I was. The person I had become was never truly mine. It was a version of myself created by their demands, their silence. I had never asked myself what I really wanted, what I really needed. The walk back to my apartment felt long, though it wasn't far. The streets were slick with rain, the lights from the shops and street lamps blurring as I passed by. I felt disconnected, as though I were watching my life unfold from a distance. There was a numbness in me that had been building for years. But this time, it wasn't sadness. It was something else. Something that felt like strength. When I stepped into my apartment, I didn't know what I was expecting. I stood in the doorway for a moment, just looking at the space. It was still, quiet. The weight of the evening settled in around me, but the usual ache wasn't there. There was no guilt, no longing to fix things. There was only silence. My phone buzzed on the table. I glanced at it and saw the text from my mother. "You embarrassed us. I hope you're proud of yourself." I stared at it for a while, the words cutting through me, but in a way that felt different this time. They didn't wound me as much as they had before. They were just words, empty words that had lost their power over me. The phone buzzed again. Missed calls. More messages. But I didn't feel the urge to answer. I didn't feel the need to explain myself, to apologize, or to make excuses. The old me would have scrambled to fix everything, would have rushed to make them happy, even if it meant sacrificing my own peace. But tonight, I didn't want to fix anything. I just wanted to be. I sat down on the floor of my apartment, the silence surrounding me in a way that used to feel oppressive, but now felt like relief. I kicked off my heels and leaned back against the couch. My hands shook, but it wasn't from fear. It was from something else. I wasn't sure what, but I knew it was the start of something new. Something I had never allowed myself to experience before. Freedom. I didn't know where this was going. I didn't know what I was supposed to do next. But I knew I couldn't go back to the way things had been. I couldn't let them keep pulling the strings, making me feel small, invisible. I had spent my whole life trying to live up to their expectations, but now, for the first time, I realized that those expectations didn't define me. I did. The next few days passed in a blur of work, calls, and unanswered texts. I ignored my parents' messages, the guilt trying to creep in, but never quite taking hold. I kept my focus on the new project I had been assigned at work. It was demanding, intense, but it was mine. No one else could take credit for it. No one else could tell me I wasn't enough. And then, in the middle of it all, there was Michael. He showed up at my door one night, a bottle of wine in one hand and a takeout container in the other. "Just checking if you're still alive," he joked, stepping over the pile of books near the door. He smiled as he walked past me, making himself at home without asking. "Come on, sit," I said, nodding toward the couch. "I've had a long day." He did, dropping down beside me and setting the food between us. The steam from the containers rose, filling the quiet space with the scent of something familiar, something comforting. For a moment, I let myself relax. I let the weight of the evening fall away. "I'm done," I said, my voice low. I didn't need to say anything more. Michael knew exactly what I meant. He'd seen me struggle with my family for years. He knew how much I had given, how much I had sacrificed. "About time you saved yourself for once," he said quietly, his voice soft but steady. "You've been living for them long enough, Skylar." For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't sinking. I was finally beginning to surface. The next few weeks were different. Not perfect, but different. I kept working. I focused on the project that had come to define me. I poured my energy into it, and it paid off. My manager pulled me aside one afternoon with a smile I hadn't seen in years. "You're ready," he said, handing me a leadership contract. The words felt strange coming from him, like something I had earned, something real. For the first time in my life, I didn't question whether I deserved it. I knew I did. And when the article about our project went live, the messages started coming in. Strangers reached out. People who had grown up feeling invisible, just like I had. Their words filled my inbox, their stories of struggle and survival mirroring my own. I didn't need my family's approval anymore. I had something better. I had myself. But even in that newfound peace, there was always the question of what came next. Would they ever come back? Would they ever reach out to me again? For years, I had wondered how I would respond. But as I moved forward, the answer became clear. It didn't matter. The weeks passed, each day blending into the next. At first, I focused on the work, burying myself in it, as though it could keep me from thinking about the things I was trying to ignore. My days were filled with meetings, deadlines, and long hours at my desk. I didn't have time to dwell on what had happened with my parents, or what might come next. All I knew was that I had a job to do, and I was going to do it well. But despite the distractions, there were moments when the silence felt heavier. The stillness in my apartment seemed to stretch longer each day, the walls closing in just a little more. My phone sat on the table, the screen occasionally lighting up with texts and missed calls. The messages from my parents had stopped for a while, but I could feel their presence looming, waiting for me to come back. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. Part of me still expected them to reach out, to apologize, or at least explain. But I knew deep down that wasn't going to happen. Then, one night, Michael came over again. I had been working late, my mind lost in numbers and projections, when I heard the familiar knock on the door. I opened it to find him standing there, as casual as ever, a takeout bag in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other. "Thought you might need some company," he said, offering the wine like a peace offering. "Also, I brought food. You look like you're about to turn into a spreadsheet." I couldn't help but laugh, the tension in my shoulders easing just a little. "I'm fine. Just a little too much coffee today." He followed me into the living room and set the food down on the table. We ate in silence for a while, the quiet between us comfortable. It was easy to be with Michael, to not have to explain everything. I didn't have to perform for him or worry about what he thought. He just was, and that was enough. Eventually, he broke the silence. "You know, it's not the same around here, without you letting all your frustration out on your family." I glanced up, surprised. I hadn't realized I had been holding so much back, but there it was. Michael had hit the nail on the head. "They don't really give me much to work with, you know," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "I've spent my whole life trying to prove I'm worth something to them. Every time I try, they turn away. They never look at me the way they look at Ashley." Michael leaned back, nodding slowly. "I get it. You've always been the responsible one, the one who handles everything. But that doesn't mean you have to carry it all. You know that, right?" I nodded but didn't speak. I wasn't sure I believed it yet. He continued, "You've been carrying your family's weight for so long. Maybe it's time to let go of that burden. You don't owe them any more of your energy." His words hit harder than I expected. Part of me still wanted to make them proud, still wanted to fix everything, even though I knew it wasn't my responsibility. But another part of me, a part I hadn't let myself hear in years, wanted to agree with him. I didn't owe them anything. We talked for hours that night, the conversation drifting from one thing to the next, but always circling back to the same truth. I couldn't keep living my life for them. I had spent too long trying to earn their love, their approval, when all I needed was to love and approve of myself. The next few days felt different, lighter, somehow. I went into work with a new perspective, throwing myself into the project in a way I hadn't before. And it paid off. The team started coming to me for guidance, asking for my input on everything from strategy to execution. It felt good, better than good, actually. It felt like I was finally being seen for who I was. Not through my family's lens, but through my own. That afternoon, my manager pulled me aside. "Skylar," he said, "I've been really impressed with the work you've been doing. You've got the leadership skills we need for the next big project." I froze for a moment, surprised by his words. What do you mean? We're giving you the leadership role on this project. You've earned it. I felt a surge of pride. For the first time in my life, I wasn't being handed a role because I was the only one who could do it. I wasn't the fallback. I was the choice. And that meant everything to me. But as I stood there, listening to my manager's praise, something else shifted. I wasn't just proud of the recognition. I was proud of myself. For the first time, I didn't need anyone else's approval to feel like I was enough. I was ready to step into this role on my own terms. I didn't go home and immediately call my parents, as I might have done in the past. Instead, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, reflecting on the changes that were slowly but surely happening. I knew I had a long way to go. Letting go of my family's expectations, of their constant pull on my life, wasn't going to be easy. But I also knew that I couldn't keep living for them. I needed to live for myself. And for the first time, I felt a real sense of peace. The silence in my apartment grew louder with each passing day. I had settled into a routine: work, dinners alone, the occasional text or call from Jessica. But there was still an undercurrent of tension that I couldn't ignore. Despite the progress I had made, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting to happen. That something would eventually break. It did, just not in the way I expected. It was a Tuesday afternoon when my phone rang. I saw the name on the screen and almost didn't answer. It was my mother. She hadn't reached out in weeks, ever since the dinner. Part of me thought they would give me space, let me breathe. But I should have known better. My family never knew how to respect boundaries, especially with me. I picked up the phone and put it to my ear, already bracing myself. Skylar. My mother's voice came through, smooth but distant. We need to talk. I didn't respond right away. I just stood there, the phone pressed to my ear, feeling the weight of her words. My mother never called me without a reason. And I knew, deep down, that it wouldn't be to apologize. It wasn't like her to apologize. About Ashley, she continued, her tone more clipped now. Her internship ended unexpectedly. There were cuts, and her tuition balance is overdue. If it isn't taken care of, she'll be asked to take a leave from the program. I felt my stomach tighten. I had known this was coming. They had always expected me to pick up the slack. Always assumed I would come through for them, no matter how much it hurt. They never saw me. Not really. And they certainly didn't see the toll it took on me to keep everything afloat. I was silent for a moment. I could already feel my old instincts kicking in. The urge to help, to fix things, to make everything right. It was so familiar. This feeling of being needed in a way that came with strings attached. But I wasn't that person anymore. I couldn't be. Skylar. My mother pressed, as though she could hear the hesitation in my silence. We need your help. You're the only one who can fix this. Her words stung, sharp and demanding. They always did. But now, there was a part of me that didn't feel like I owed her anything. Not anymore. Not after everything. I took a deep breath and steadied myself. I'm sorry, Mom, I said, my voice steady but firm. I can't help with this anymore. Not like I used to. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could practically hear her trying to process my words, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. For a moment, I almost expected her to argue, to beg, but she didn't. Skylar, she finally said, her voice tinged with frustration. You're being unreasonable. I could feel the old guilt creeping in, that familiar pang of responsibility. But I didn't give in. This time, I wouldn't. No? I said. My voice a little softer now. I'm not. I've been carrying everyone's burdens for so long, and I can't do it anymore. Not if it means losing myself. The silence on the other end was deafening. I waited for her to speak, to lash out, to tell me I was being selfish. But instead, she just said, "You'll regret this." I felt the weight of her words, but instead of shrinking under them, I stood taller. I knew now that I wouldn't regret it. I had already given so much, too much, for people who never truly saw me. It was time for me to see myself. I hung up the phone and stared at it for a moment, my hands shaking. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was something else. Something new. Something that felt like freedom. Later that night, I sat on my couch, the weight of the conversation still heavy in the air. I had expected some emotional release, some kind of catharsis, but it hadn't come. Instead, there was just an unsettling calm. I had stood up for myself, finally. But the road ahead was still unclear. The following days were strange. I kept expecting to hear from my parents again. I expected them to show up at my door, to demand that I help, that I fix what had been broken. But they didn't. The silence between us grew, and with it, a strange sense of peace. At work, things were picking up. The project I had been leading was gaining momentum. And I was finally starting to feel like I was in control. People started looking to me for answers. And for the first time, I felt like I was in the right place. Not because of my family's expectations, but because of my own. But even as I found success in my career, the absence of my family's presence left a void. A part of me still missed them. Even though I knew I had done the right thing by walking away. The emotional residue of years of neglect didn't disappear overnight. It was a quiet ache, something that would take time to heal. I still had moments when I felt like I was failing. I still felt the pull of my old life, the life I had tried so hard to hold together. But now, I was learning to be okay with the silence. I was learning to fill that space with my own voice, my own needs. And slowly, it was starting to feel like enough. It had been a week since the phone call. My parents hadn't reached out again, and a part of me almost expected them to. I kept waiting for them to show up at my door, to demand something, anything. But they didn't. The silence between us felt strange. Like something was still hanging in the air, unfinished. I had made my choice, and yet it still didn't feel real. I had done the right thing, I knew that. But there was a hollow space inside me. A place where I used to feel needed. Where I used to feel wanted. I had always lived my life with the belief that if I just worked hard enough, if I gave enough of myself, they would finally see me, but they never did. And now, I was trying to reconcile that reality with the life I was building. I didn't expect them to apologize, not really. But there was a part of me that still hoped they would. That hope, however small, kept me on edge. The next evening, just as I was finishing a long day at work, I got a knock at the door. I froze for a moment, my heart skipping in my chest. I didn't have to open the door to know who it was. I had known this day would come. I wasn't ready for it, but I knew it would come. I took a breath and walked over to the door. When I opened it, There they were. My parents, standing in the hallway, their faces unreadable. My mother had that same controlled expression, the one she always wore, when she wanted to appear unaffected, even though I knew better. My father stood behind her, arms crossed, his face tight. Neither of them said anything at first. They just stood there, waiting for me to invite them in, as if nothing had changed. I didn't move. I didn't invite them in. "You're here," I said, my voice steady, but I could feel the tension rising in my chest. My mother was the first to speak, her voice a little sharper than usual. "Skylar, we need to talk." I nodded, though I didn't feel the need to say anything. I had already known why they were here. It was about Ashley, of course. It always was. "We've hit a rough patch," my mother continued, her voice too calm. "Ashley's tuition is overdue. And now her internship has ended early. She's at risk of being kicked out of the program. We need your help." I could hear the urgency in her voice, the same tone she used when she wanted something from me. My heart sank, but I didn't show it. Instead, I took a deep breath, letting the quiet stretch between us before I answered. "You came here because you want money. Again?" I said it softly, but the words felt heavy in my mouth. "You want me to fix this. You always want me to fix it." There was a brief flicker of surprise on her face, but she quickly masked it. "Skylar, don't be petty. Family is family. You're our daughter, you owe us this." Her words hit harder than I expected, but I kept my stance firm. "I owe you nothing. You never gave me anything to owe you for. You've taken from me for years, and I've been there every time you needed me. But I can't keep doing this. Not anymore." My father shifted uncomfortably behind her, his jaw tightening. "Skylar, don't make this harder than it needs to be. We raised you." I shook my head, my voice finally rising. "No, you didn't raise me. You drained me. You used me for everything I had, and when I needed you, you never saw me. You never saw me, just what I could do for you." My mother opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off, my words coming faster now, spilling out of me like a dam breaking. "You don't get to play the family card now. Not after everything." For the first time in years, I could feel the weight of everything I had held in check. Every ounce of resentment, every moment of silence I had swallowed, pushing its way to the surface. I wasn't just angry. I was tired. "You've always expected me to give everything," I continued, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and exhaustion. "But I can't do it anymore. I'm done being your fallback. I'm done being the one who picks up the pieces." The room was still for a long moment. I could see the shock on their faces, the disbelief. For a split second, I thought my father might step forward, might try to convince me to change my mind. But he didn't. Instead, he stood there, his lips pressing into a thin line. Finally, my mother spoke again, her voice low but insistent. "Skylar, you're making a mistake. You'll regret this. You're our daughter." I felt something shift inside me. It was like the last of the chains that had held me to them were snapping. I could feel it, this sudden clarity. I was free. "No," I said, my voice steady, unwavering. "You disowned me a long time ago. I'm not the person you want me to be, and I'm done trying to be. Consider me as if I never existed. Live your lives as though there was never a daughter." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, no one moved. The silence between us felt like a chasm. My mother opened her mouth to say something, but I didn't let her. "Goodbye," I said quietly, turning away from them and walking to the door. I opened it wide, gesturing for them to leave. They didn't say anything else. Not a word. My mother hesitated, searching for something to hold on to, but she found nothing. She turned, walking out of the apartment without another glance. My father followed slowly, the sound of his footsteps faint in the distance. I stood there for a moment, my hand on the door, watching them leave. The air felt thick, but for the first time in my life, it wasn't suffocating. It was freeing. When I closed the door behind them, I leaned against it, letting out a long breath. The silence in the apartment was no longer a void, it was mine. For the first time, I was truly alone. And somehow, it felt like the beginning of something new. The days following my parents' visit felt surreal. A weight had been lifted. But there was also a strange emptiness that lingered. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to feel: relief, maybe. But it came with the quiet realization that I had severed ties with the people I had spent my whole life trying to please. It wasn't just a loss of family. It was a loss of the version of me that had lived for them. The first few days were disorienting. I threw myself into work, focusing on the project that had become my new focus. It wasn't that I didn't care about it before, it was my passion. But now, it felt like something I could pour all of my energy into without distractions. I had always been a hard worker, but something had shifted. It wasn't just about doing the job anymore. It was about finding my place in it, about proving to myself that I could stand on my own. I spent late nights at the office, sipping coffee, and watching the glow of my computer screen as the city outside blurred in the rain. My apartment felt like a sanctuary when I returned, a place where I could just be. The quiet was no longer oppressive. It was peaceful. But then there were moments when I passed a family on the street or saw a mother and daughter laughing together, that I felt a pang of longing. It was as though the absence of my parents had carved a hole in me, and no matter how much work I threw at it, that emptiness couldn't be filled. I tried not to think about them. I focused on the positive things that had started to happen at work. My manager noticed how I'd stepped up and started giving me more responsibility. One day, he called me into his office with a smile that felt unfamiliar but welcome. "Skylar," he said, "you've been doing exceptional work on this project. We're confident you're ready for the next step. We want you to lead the next phase." I felt a rush of pride, the kind I hadn't experienced in a long time. This was mine, all mine. No one could take this from me, and no one had handed it to me because of family expectations or obligations. It was my hard work paying off, my resilience carving out a place where I was truly seen. The recognition felt good, but it was also a reminder of how far I had come from the quiet, unseen daughter who used to hide behind her family's demands. One evening, as I sat on my balcony after another long day, I found myself reflecting on everything that had changed. The Seattle skyline stretched out before me, the city lights shimmering in the mist of the rain. I had wanted to be part of something bigger, to belong. And now, for the first time, I realized I didn't need anyone's approval to belong. I had built my own place in the world, and it was mine alone. No one could take that from me. Not my parents, not anyone. Still, as much as I tried to focus on the positive. I knew that my decision to cut ties with my family wasn't something I could ignore forever. I couldn't stop wondering if they would try to contact me again. A part of me still wanted them to reach out, to apologize, to make things right. But another part of me, the part that had been growing stronger with each passing day, knew I couldn't keep waiting for something that was never going to come. And then, one morning, it happened. I was in the middle of a meeting at work when my phone buzzed with a new message. I glanced at it quickly, thinking it was just a work email. But when I saw the name on the screen, my heart skipped. It was from my mother. I almost didn't open it. I had promised myself I wouldn't go back to that place. But something inside me, something that still carried the weight of years of hope, couldn't resist. I clicked on the message, and my stomach dropped. "We need to talk. Please." I stared at the screen for a long time, my finger hovering over the reply button. I could feel the old pull, the urge to go back and make it right, to fix what had been broken. But I also knew that the only thing I could fix now was myself. I didn't reply. Instead, I set my phone down and turned my attention back to the meeting. I didn't need to look back. I didn't need to go back to a place that had never truly been mine. The silence between my family and me would remain for now. And as strange as it felt, I knew that silence was my choice, my way of saying I was no longer bound by their expectations. For the first time, I was living for me. The following weeks brought a sense of quiet momentum. I had grown accustomed to the silence from my parents, and it didn't hurt anymore. At first, it was strange, almost unsettling, like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. But over time, I came to realize that silence was a gift, a choice I had made, and it was mine. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for someone else to fill the space around me. I was filling it on my own, with my own ambitions and the path I was forging for myself. Work continued to thrive. The project I had taken over started gaining recognition, and it was clear that my efforts were being noticed. Clients were impressed, and the company was moving forward with plans I had helped shape. I felt like I was on the right track, like, for the first time, I was truly making a difference. Not because anyone expected me to, but because I wanted to. It was mine to own, and I wasn't waiting for anyone else to tell me I deserved it. Still, there was something in the back of my mind, something I couldn't shake. The email had been brief, almost cold. "We need to talk. Please." My mother's message had lingered in my thoughts for days. I hadn't replied. I wasn't going to. But something inside me, some deep, seated hope that had been buried for years, told me I would hear from them again. And sure enough, a few days later, the knock came. I didn't have to guess who it was. It was the same feeling I'd had the first time they'd shown up at my door. The weight in the air, the heaviness that made everything seem still and sharp. I knew I was about to face something I wasn't ready for. But this time, I didn't feel the pull to give in. I didn't feel the old fear or guilt creeping up, urging me to open the door, to hear them out. I stood there for a moment, just breathing, collecting myself. When I opened the door, I saw them standing in front of me again, my parents, unchanged. My mother was the first to speak, but her voice was different this time. The usual demand in her tone was gone, replaced by something more subdued, almost fragile. Skylar, she said, her words tentative, as if testing the waters, unsure if she still had the right to ask anything of me. We need to talk about Ashley. I held my ground. I wasn't going to let her push me, not this time. I thought I made myself clear. I replied, my voice calm but firm. I'm not going to fix everything for you anymore. She flinched, and for the first time, I saw something like regret in her eyes. We've made a mess of things, haven't we? She said, almost to herself. But you're our daughter, Skylar. We need you. I didn't flinch. I didn't even feel the usual urge to take the burden from them. I know what you need, I said, my voice steady. But I can't be the one to carry it anymore. My father remained silent behind her, his arms crossed as he watched the exchange. There was a tension in the air, but it wasn't the same kind I'd felt in the past. This time, it was different. This time, I wasn't the one shrinking back. I was the one standing strong. My mother reached for me, her hand outstretched as if she were trying to reconnect, to bridge the gap that had grown between us. Skylar, please, she said softly. We've lost so much time. Don't we deserve another chance? I met her gaze, steady and unflinching. The words she had said to me at dinner, the years of emotional neglect, the manipulation, they all rushed back to me, in a flood. I had spent so much of my life chasing their approval, trying to be what they wanted me to be. But I was done with that. I was done with trying to earn something that was never going to be given freely. No, I said simply, shaking my head. You've had your chances. And I've given you everything I had. But I can't keep giving when it's never enough. She stood there for a long moment, the silence stretching between us. I could see the frustration, the hurt in her eyes, but I couldn't go back. I had made my decision, and I wasn't going to undo it for anyone, not even her. Finally, she let out a long breath, a slow exhale that felt like she was letting go of something she had been holding onto for a long time. She turned to my father, who hadn't said a word, and gave him a small nod. Without another word, they turned to leave. The door closed behind them with a soft click, and for the first time, I didn't feel the weight of their absence. I didn't feel the hole they had left in me. It was gone. I had reclaimed my life. I stood there for a while, letting the quiet settle in, and for the first time, I didn't feel alone. The silence wasn't a void anymore. It was just mine. And I was finally okay with that. In the days that followed, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of what I had done. But it wasn't the crushing weight I had feared. It was liberating. I had stopped waiting for my parents to validate me, to make me feel seen. I had become my own source of strength. And that was enough. At work, things continued to move forward. My project was a success, and my leadership role grew with each new task I took on. I wasn't just getting by anymore, I was thriving. I had finally found my place, and it wasn't just in my career. It was in myself. I had chosen my own path, and I wasn't looking back. The days that followed felt like a slow, quiet unraveling. There was a kind of peace that came with the decision I had made, but it wasn't the peace I had imagined. It wasn't clean or complete. It was still a work in progress, and I wasn't sure if I'd ever feel fully settled. But I knew one thing for certain: I was no longer waiting for validation from anyone. Not my parents, not anyone else. I had become my own source of strength. Work kept moving forward. My team and I were finishing the project. And I was taking on more responsibility. There were moments when I felt overwhelmed, but they were different now. They weren't the old suffocating feelings of being stretched too thin for others. They were the weight of pushing myself to grow, to take on more, to finally see what I was capable of on my own. At times, I thought about my parents. I thought about the years I spent trying to earn their approval, trying to be seen. But when those thoughts came, they didn't carry the same sting. I had given so much of myself to them, and they had never truly seen me for who I was. But I had finally learned to see myself, to stop hiding behind the expectations they placed on me. It wasn't easy. Sometimes, it felt like there was a gap between the woman I was becoming and the woman I had always tried to be. But that gap wasn't something to fix. It was something to embrace. I had to let go of the old version of me, the one that had lived in the shadow of family obligations and guilt. And though it hurt at first, it was also liberating. I was finding my own way, without apologies. Then, one evening, as I sat in my apartment, I received an unexpected message. It was from Jessica, my closest friend. I hadn't spoken to her in a while. She had always been there, offering a steady presence in my life. I opened the message, curious about what she had to say. Skylar, I saw the article. You're amazing. You've been through so much. And you've come out stronger. I just wanted to tell you, I'm so proud of you. I stared at the message, feeling a warm rush of emotion. It was the kind of recognition I had been looking for. Not from my parents or anyone else, but from someone who truly understood. Jessica wasn't part of my family, but her words meant more than anything my parents could have ever said. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was on the right path. The validation I had spent years seeking wasn't something I had to chase anymore. It was something I had built on my own. A few days later, I got a call from the magazine that had featured our project. They wanted to interview me for a follow-up, to talk about the success we had achieved. I agreed, of course. But this time, the words I spoke were different. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was simply speaking about the work I had done, the work I had led. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to make myself smaller, to downplay my achievements. When the interview went live, the feedback flooded in. People I didn't even know started reaching out, sending messages about how my story resonated with them. They spoke about their own experiences with family and expectations, and how they had struggled to find their own voice. It was strange, feeling seen by people I'd never met, but it also felt incredibly validating. I thought back to the moments when I had been invisible to my family, the times when I had been overlooked, ignored, and made to feel small. But now, those moments didn't define me. I had finally stepped into a version of myself that wasn't tied to anyone else's narrative. Work continued to be a refuge. But now it wasn't just about survival. It was about thriving. I made decisions with confidence, knowing that I wasn't looking for someone else's approval. The team respected me not because of who I was expected to be, but because of who I was. The silence from my parents remained. I knew they hadn't changed. I knew they still saw me through the lens of their own disappointment. But I didn't need them to change. I didn't need their approval. What I had learned was that their inability to see me didn't mean I was invisible. It just meant I had to see myself, first and foremost. The evening came when I was standing on my balcony again. The Seattle skyline stretched out before me, the city lights reflecting off the bay. It was the same view I had looked at so many times. But this time, it felt different. It felt like I was looking at it with new eyes. I wasn't waiting for a phone call, a text, or an apology. I wasn't hoping for anything. I had let go of that part of me, the part that had always been waiting for validation from others. Now, I was simply breathing. Breathing in the stillness of my own life. A life I had built from the ground up, without anyone else's expectations weighing me down. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to look back. The journey ahead was mine to take. And I was finally walking it on my own terms,